Hi there and welcome. Steve Wills here. Thanks for joining me. In this particular video, we'll be looking at various aspects of data handling, introducing a new functionality we refer to as dynamic lists. These minimize data entry errors. When those errors do occur, we want to signal those to end users in a very consistent way. We'll also be looking at both active and passive controls. And lastly, taking a look forward. So diving now into dynamic lists, these minimize data entries as opposed to typing in information. We want users to select, wherever possible, entries from a list. And we want the management of those lists to be in the hands of non-IT professionals in order to push responsibility down the personnel chain. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. This will be user E5. Now, of course, anyone can use these lists. E5, as we'll see, has the special privileges to actually modify these lists. So here we'll just demonstrate how it works. Simply selecting entries from the list. Now going into those list definitions, we'll create a new entry. And as you see here, there is a very robust error checking mechanism where we check for both completeness and consistency. We don't want redundant entries in the list either. You could, of course, create your own mechanisms here, but all of this functionality comes automatically with Workflow Ascendant. There you can see the new entry. And lastly, here is where we've allocated the privilege to E5 to modify those lists. So how is it done? Going into Domino Designer. To create a new list, you'll first need to modify the view name, change the category name, as you see here, the button to create new entries. Now looking at the workflow document itself, changing those fields, and lastly, the information in the particular buttons. Now taking a look at error handling, we want to be able to have a consistent error mechanism we use throughout the workflow applications we develop. Again, we're looking to put in place a meta process, not just simply one application. We want all of our applications to look and feel consistently, driving down costs. So there is the error handling system. So how is it done? Looking now first at the red dots. As you can see here, we use a particular naming format. So the field name _E. And to actually display a red dot, we have wingdings, as you can see there. And now creating a new one, it's just to explain how it works. But to put one in place, you just simply need to cut and paste existing examples. So we'll call our field temp, for example. We'll rename this field for temp _E. And lastly, we will need to add this field to the control list. There is the routine that we call to perform this. And we'll simply introduce the new field here. Any text set here will display an error message and halt processing when the send button is selected. and any field names contained there will display the corresponding red dot. So now, taking a look to see how this works, you can see this new field is now controlled along with the others. And there it is. Active controls. Here is where we want to control data selectively based on state changes. This demonstrates a context-based data control system using code abstraction. This is very important in workflow automation. I'll demonstrate why. So first, taking a look at what it looks like, we'll go into our same process again. And let's assume for a minute that marketing is the responsible user to supply this information. So let's advance the state marketing to take a look first and orient us in the application. And here we are as user yellow, marketing. And so where do we want to apply these controls? When we save the document? Well, not really, because it's still under the control of marketing. It's sort of like a draft. So that wouldn't work. How about when the document is sent back to the author for modification? Or when the document is rejected? Wouldn't make much sense. Why would you? It's only here when marketing essentially says, I approve the contents of this document, that we want to apply those controls. So how do we do this? So here we are again in Domino Designer. We'll go to our routine, which we have already tested. By the way, this is also how we recommend doing your development, the process that you go through. So we'll copy and paste this routine in WA application specific. And here we want to make a connection between the text and the actual procedure call. Lastly, we'll go back into the Notes client, into the state documents, and here is where we will apply the code abstraction. So going into the state document marketing, you can see here is where the document is approved. We'll put the text there to indicate that it should be executed when that particular workflow path is selected. And now let's take a look and see what it looks like. So you can see I'm user admin. I can switch hats and go through the workflow as I so see fit. So here is the controls, as we would expect. And lastly, we'll send it back to the users where the error system is not invoked. So passive controls, here is we want to prevent unauthorized users from modifying aspects of the document that we don't wish. And then I want to reinforce also using field roles as opposed to ACL role controls. This is very important for delegation. So if we're able to delegate from one user to another, we want to be sure that that delegated to user has access to all of the fields that are required for that role. So let's take a look and see what that looks like. So going in as user A1, we will create the document. You see that user A1 does not have access to modify the fields dedicated to marketing. So you can see the importance of not controlling those fields at this point in the workflow, as the document would be blocked there. So we'll move on to marketing. You can see where marketing does have access to these fields. The error system is applied appropriately when the document is sent forward in the workflow. There we go. And lastly, just to show, going in as the DB administrator, that person also has access to these fields. So how is it done? Now here, this is basic notes, but just for completeness, I've included this. So here we have various aspects. You can see only Marketing and DB Manager can modify the field. Again, we're using field roles and not ACL roles. You can see here, marketing field, not ACL. And lastly, since fields are not instantiated in notes when they're initially created, we need to hide that field. So just taking a look forward, a few things coming down the pike. We'll be releasing the latest version of Workflow Ascendant, I believe, next week. So please stay tuned for that. That contains the real-time delegation, these new dynamic lists, and several other new features that we've included. We'll be taking a look under the hood, doing a deep dive into the architecture behind Workflow Ascendant, looking at various other development aspects of it, looking at workflow development strategies, how we put in place and how we automate new systems, and much more to come. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. A bit basic, but essential elements in automating any process. Hope you'll join me for our upcoming videos. Thanks again for joining me.